Welcome to the Real Life Overtime Podcast, the place where the members of the Real Life Ministries sermon team go deeper into the weekend sermon. Watch them as they unpack, unfold, and unravel the weekend sermon like never before. So fasten your seatbelts, hit play, and join us for Real Life Overtime, where every episode is an adventure and this sermon doesn't end on Sunday.
I want to welcome you to the Overtime Podcast. My name is Chris Short. I'm one of the executive pastors here at Real Life, and I'm sitting with some of my friends, Jim Blazin and Christian Putman. Jim is the North Campus pastor, and Christian is our adult ministries lead at the Coeur d'Alene campus. I say that all right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I want to make sure. There's so many details. And this weekend, we all had the privilege and responsibility to talk about the word tolerance, and it was a fun and tricky one.
Yeah.
But I wanted to start with this question to you guys and just navigate this. This is a quote that I read when I preached here from John Wesley in 1700 something. The quote goes like this: "What one generation tolerates, another will embrace." And I've seen other variations of that, which says we'll also celebrate, right? Mm-hmm. So what one generation tolerates, another will embrace, another generation would celebrate. Just share from your sermon kind of how you navigated the discussion around tolerance.
Yeah, it's really good. We talked just about how in the word tolerance, there's almost multiple different definitions and words that are being brought in, and how even when you look up the Webster's dictionary of the word tolerance, they don't even go by that definition, and it means acceptance, and by acceptance means celebration, not only accepting something but celebrating it. We talked about love. If you don't tolerate everything about me, and by that I mean celebrate and accept all things, then you don't really love me. And so it is a very interesting word that is hard to navigate in the discussion, because we as believers, I would say, are the most tolerant, most accepting, loving people on earth. Jesus was that way, but there is a truth, and in the definition is that it doesn't mean we agree. You know, we're to tolerate hard people, and at the same time, we're not to tolerate evil, you know. And so we talked about that with a lot of different things, and so
that's great. How about you, Jim?
Yeah, we talked about just the difference between the world's definition. It's funny because I read the Oxford Dictionary,
I did too, yeah.
which is actually more historical than Webster's. But we talked about what, just some of the woke influence and the ideology that does say that not only is your idea important, but you have to agree with me, or I have to agree with you as well. And then we went to kind of the biblical picture of it and the fact that Jesus really embodied that. He was very tolerant. I used the text out of John 14:6 where he says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." And that statement, I mean, if you go back to the very beginning, you go back to Exodus 20 with the 10 Commandments, the first commandment was, "You shall have no other God before me." God has always been exclusive in truth. This is who I am. That's great. Right?
Yep.
But very inclusive in the sense that I'm inviting you into a relationship. And I think sometimes we kind of cut it off at the, we say this is truth, but we don't apply grace to it, and we don't give the invitation, the relational component, where we're able to talk through things.
Absolutely.
And our worldview now is, if I don't agree with you, then I won't listen to you. I don't even validate who you are.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely.
So.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, and it's even funny just listening to, even in different dictionary definitions, the word for tolerance is relayed differently. And I think that's a perfect example of, where's this moving line? We've seen this drift is the word I used a lot, kind of to an anchor. Without an anchor, where you'll go wherever the wind blows you, and that's kind of what we're seeing with our culture. And I love what you said, exclusive in the absolute truth of God's word and who he is, but inclusive in bringing people in. That's a great way to say it. I'm sure we all said it just in different ways. And I don't know about you guys, but I probably had encountered more lobby conversations this week than in a long time of speaking. And maybe just talk about that, the dynamics of what people are experiencing as you kind of wrestle between truth and grace and these, like how to navigate exclusive, inclusive, tolerant, intolerant. What did you guys, some conversations you had, and, obviously no names, but what are some things that you wrestled through this weekend?
Yeah, I got a lot of questions on, aren't we supposed to be loving and accepting? and that's exactly what we kind of broke down, and then it played out in discussion, like, but how do we actually do that?
Yep.
And so we just journey through. Like for me, I brought up the story, for me, I was an addict a long time ago, got clean a long time ago, but back in that season, no one taught me, but I had this mindset. I remember going to my dad at one point and saying, why don't you accept me and love me? This is who I am, and you aren't for that, so you don't love me. And his explanation stuck with me. He says, son, I will always love you. I always accept you. I'm always for you.
Great.
But I cannot condone something that not only is going to kill you physically, but spiritually is leading you down a pathway to your destruction. So I love you enough to actually share the truth with you. I will always pursue you, always love you, always be there for you. But this is not good for you. And so we've talked about how, Jesus went to those places all the time. He went to Zacchaeus. He went to the worst of the worst, and he loved them. He pursued them. He tolerated. He bore with them. And through that, they responded, but it was in the backdrop of truth, because you can't really experience grace if you don't call evil what it is, because you have nothing to compare it to.
Great
And
point.
it's through that we get to see, man, God actually loves me through that brokenness, but he loves me enough to say what truth is.
Oh, thank you. That's great.
Good. To your question about actual questions that I ran into, there are a lot of people trying to navigate like unique extended family dynamics, or even within their own children, to go, because one of the points I made is that we are to know what we are not to tolerate as Christians, and so there. I had a conversation with a family that is dealing with extended family, and their kids are fairly young, and they're trying to have appropriate boundaries within their home for this extended family to come in. They don't want to alienate them as Christians, but they also want to have appropriate boundaries that say, I love you, but this behavior, we don't tolerate this in our home. I respect the fact that you choose to do that in your life, but I'm not going to invite that into our home. So we just kind of navigated through, it's like with you, Christian, with the age of your kids, you have to do that as well right now. There's certain things that our kids want to experience in the culture they're in that are not the best thing. And parenting isn't popular. And sometimes it does involve saying hard things. It doesn't mean we don't love. Right. We have to have both grace and truth, right?
Absolutely. It's funny you said that, because I think most of the conversations I had were really kid and parent related. And I think it's navigating, and some of them are adult children who are going, they have decided to walk away from Jesus. They have decided to really live a variety of different lifestyles. And they're going, my kids no longer want relationship with me because they know I disagree with them, which has got to be just so heartbreaking for a parent.
Yeah. Right.
That they're like, they won't even have relationship with me because they disagree with my beliefs. But I love what you said regarding parenting. And I think that's a good thing for all of us to really reconcile is in our homes, especially those that have kids in the home, man, it's actually our job to help them understand what is intolerable and what's tolerable. Where's their preferences and styles and differences that really shouldn't be something that you don't tolerate, But then what's important? That's like, this is behavior. This is what we believe. And your dad's story is a great example, with you. This is, kids, because I care about you more than I care about just making you happy, and my love for you is actually because like, I actually want the best for you. And that's a hard one, and the thing that I would just maybe drop in there that I talked about a little bit in my message is, like, no one message, like, sermon can answer, truth and grace and knowing what to do in every scenario. For me, the hope is that our people in our church would really just dive deep and know God's word at a level where they know what sounds like, out of bounds. What's, for them, they can really know the difference.
Yeah, I was thinking about something that Christy and I used a long time ago, was parenting with love and logic. As a curriculum, and what it taught us was being willing to ask really good questions. So often, even with our kids that have ideas that are influenced more by the world than they are by the Lord, if you sit and you don't alienate yourself from them, and you just ask logical questions that say, if you were to make this decision, where will you end up downstream? Most of the time they come to their senses to realize what I actually think I believe doesn't even play out if someone helps me process it in a safe environment.
It's really good.
And I think that's Jesus with the woman at the well.
Yep.
I mean, there was a social, like, how can you with the Samaritan woman? She says, how can you ask me for water? You're a Jew. I'm a Samaritan, right? Like, there's social differences. And then he says, well, give me a drink. She says, well, you don't even have a cup to drink from. The well's deep. I mean, he's coming from two angles to sit with her.
Yep.
And what does he end up doing? He finds out what her real need is, and he speaks to that.
That's so great, man.
It's really good.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, I think as we look at just the whole series, as this wraps up the series, in these actual live conversations, sometimes it's just important to know that you start to identify we're actually not talking about the same thing. So when they say you're actually not loving and accepting, you're not tolerating me, then you can go by how God has defined this. Actually, I'm suffering for you. And as you look into the word, I looked at Ephesians, which is the next series we're talking about. I looked at that verse, and it says that we are to tolerate in kindness and humility. But that word for tolerate in the original Greek, part of the definition was to hold up against.
That's great.
It is to hold up and suffer with, to come and forbear for. And so a part of that is not moving from the truth, but it is lovingly and patiently instructing. And then in 1 Timothy, it says that in hopes that people will come to their senses to escape the devil's trap. So the people we're talking about, the people aren't our enemy. The devil's our enemy, and anyone not connected to Christ is being deceived by our enemy. And so we gently instruct in hopes that they'll come to their senses so that they would escape the devil's trap. And so for us, as we look at these words, to go, man, this is where they are. How do I gently and humbly, lovingly help guide them to truth? And it is loving to share the truth and not water it down.
So good. I love it. This has been good. I have one more question I think we just want to add on to the end here would be, we got people that are listening that are leaders in our church, small group leaders, or maybe they're influencing the next generation, youth ministry. What kind of wisdom would you give them to navigate these conversations about tolerance?
It's good. I remember we had a life group south of the river where we were all in the teens at the time. And so everybody was processing. And I guess what I learned in there is instead of jumping in and saying, well, this is what worked for me per se, was to sit with people in the tension that they were trying to navigate and go, how do I empathize first? How do I active listen? How do they feel like they've actually been heard? Because we can give answers and help for people, but until they know that we're with them in it, we're willing to get in it with them, then it's just noise.
That's so good.
So,
really good. Great. What are your thoughts, Christian?
Yeah, I think for me, knowing in each conversation, there's often ditches on both sides. And sometimes based upon your experience, you speak to the other side of the ditch. And so don't swing the pendulums that there's a side over here that says, we have to tolerate everything. Then there's a side over here that's more pharisaical. We point out everything. There's ditches on both sides. So how do we identify what is the truth with both? Don't swing the pendulum based on your experience with whatever it is, and go, here's where I'm going to go. This was Jesus, truth and love. I'm going to love people, but I'm not going to water it on the truth. The world hated Jesus for calling it evil, accused him, but yet he came to seek and to save and die for the world. So you can call evil what it is and still be loving. And how do we do that well and know that there's a team? Like to leaders, like no matter how many times you deal with a situation, I never as a leader deal with it myself, whether it's my coaches, the other people around me. I always bring in on harder discussions to see if I'm missing something, to see how I could love someone well.
That's really good. I mean, both of those things are so great. And I just want to echo, you talk about truth, love, truth, grace, and that Jesus fully embraced both of those. He wasn't one or the other. And that's for me, probably my biggest takeaway from speaking this weekend is not to choose what I'm feeling in the moment. It's like I'm feeling like it's 100% justice and truth with being absent of grace, or all grace, absent of truth. And to, it's like certain family members and certain friends, I can, get tipped pretty quick, one way or the other, depending on the context of that relationship. So I love your advice and thought of how do I look people in the eyes and then balance those different truth, to balance truth and love, because people need the grace that they've received. They need to, let that flow through them, but we also need to hold tight to the promises and that what's best for them is God's word, but there really are no shortcuts. It's like there's no easy answer for this. People have to know God's word. They have to embrace his grace and let it flow through them. And I definitely love what you said there at the end. Without other people to process with, I don't know what I would do.
Yeah.
I need people to go with me and help me, bounce things off of and help me know if I'm getting a little bit off track myself. So that's huge. Well, this has been helpful. It's been a great discussion, and just excited. Like you said, we finished the sermon series. It's been such a great one, Lost in Translation. But we are kicking off a new sermon series next weekend called One, looking at Ephesians, and it's going to be just a great journey. So I hope we'll see you next time.